So let's talk about this red Jeep behind me. I did take the 35s off and I put 33s back on, and I have not gotten any check engine lights. But one thing that I did get is the sound of brakes doing metal on metal. It literally was a sound and a squeaking sound like I had mud or something in there, so I need to investigate that. We're going to be jacking the back of the Jeep up and getting the tires off the ground, taking the tires off. I'm going to take the rotors off. I'm going to go ahead and take the calipers off. That I'm sure you know how to do. We'll begin this video with removing the rear axle. Let's get into it. The brakes with the metal on metal, those are right here. I've got these in from Powerstop. Ordered them off Amazon. There's an Amazon link below. What do you get in here? Well, you get Powerstop brakes. You get some stickers. If I was 10 years old, that would be incredible. A little bit of literature. And your rotors. And since I'm going to do the brakes and I'm going to have almost everything off anyway, I might as well check the bearings on the back. All right, you got your wheels all off. Your Jeep is jacked up. Now it's time to get into the brakes. First, you're going to need a 18mm ratchet. Some people take the caliper off of the caliper harness, but I've always found it easier just to take the entire caliper and harness off. This again, 18mm, 2 bolts hanging on. So you've got those bolts off. Get out your caliper hanger. Wondering what that metal grinding sound was? My rear brakes were gone. So that's what I've been hearing. The rotor itself, when it gets down to the metal, it's wore the inside of this rotor out really bad if you look at it. So pretty much this rotor is history, and I'm gonna put on some new rotors. We're gonna probably change these parking brakes as well. Before I get into doing the parking brake, I'm gonna go ahead and take the axle out so that I can inspect the bearings. Before I take the axle out, I'm gonna have to take off the ABS mechanism that's here so that I don't damage it on the way out. So there's an ABS sensor right here with one of those little red clips. They usually break, and when the end of it breaks off, it becomes a little bit more difficult to get the red clip to snap backwards. So the end of this little red tab came off, and it was very hard to get it out. And after the red tab comes backwards, you're gonna have to push this top in to be able to pull that sensor off. So the red tab has a normal little piece on it that you can pull backwards. Then you're gonna push this right here to pull it off of there. 8mm socket. Now comes the very wonderful and careful part, getting that part out carefully. Pry it out if you're gonna reuse it. This ABS sensor is pretty dirty and pretty grimy. I might go ahead and order me a couple of sensors. Now that that's off, I can move to these back bolts, and that's what's holding the assembly for the brakes and the bearing retainer in. Three. Oh, that's a knuckle buster almost right there. That's better. You can get a slide hammer. They're not that expensive, and you will use it for a lot of things. For way less than the cost of the labor of doing this job, you could get this tool. Overall, having the right tool for the job always makes it way easier. And this is how a slide hammer works. This slides backwards and it reverse hammers. Instead of hammering that way, it's pulling this way. And just like that, your axle is now out and you can change your axle bearing. Ooh, that's milky and spilling all over the place. Let's get a tray. Because we went through a lot of water and perhaps the seals were bad, that gear oil definitely has water mixed into it. If you have that milky look, you need to change it. So I'm gonna change that. I'm pulling this race out. It almost came out anyway. Once the race is out, we will go ahead and replace everything. So brakes were pretty bad. Bearings, not so bad, but I'm gonna go ahead and change them anyway. The fluid in the differential, milky and nasty looking. Gonna change that too. If you go through water or sand, you're gonna have problems with your seals in the axles. If water gets into your differential fluid, then it's not gonna be very effective at protecting your gears, and your gears won't last too long.
Okay.
Well, I have been looking and trying to find a way to press the bearing off instead of cutting it off with a die grinder. I have a press right here, but the problem is this structure stops you from being able to put it in there. The clamshell that I have won't fit around this. If this was off and even that was off, you're still, everyone that I see online that talks about removing the old bearing from an axle all uses a die grinder. So now, against my own will, I'm gonna cut the bearing and bearing retainer off. To do that, I'm gonna start by making an X in that, and then I'm gonna hit it with a chisel and hopefully not touch the axle. So what we did is we hit that with a punch in the groove that I made, and it put a hairline crack in it. And with that hairline crack, I can now move that piece off, which is holding everything else on. We can easily cut the carriage off. Trying to carefully not cut into the mounting bracket with the 4 bolts on it. I'm trying to cut the inner portion of the bearing but not hit the axle. Here's a tip. Cut the seal off so that you can push it out of the way, so that you can get this out of the way. Now you can get to the part that you need to get to. There has to be a better way of doing this. There has to be a special tool or something that can get in there and get those components off. Now here's the real aggravating thing. If you were just changing a $6 seal, oil seal on the end, you'd have to take all that stuff off and ruin it just to change the seal. Day number 2. The bearings are off. The shaft is cleaned. Now we got to reassemble it, and then we're going to put it onto the press. Your mount. Bolts that way. Second, your seal. The seal goes flat side to the outside. That goes on, and it should just nicely slide on there carefully. The next component is going to be your bearing, which is really important that you put it on the right way. We're going to come with the race, the outer part, that the bearing rides on, there's a lip. And if you remember when you cut it off, that this lip was over here against the seal. So this lip goes again against the seal. The reason why you want to is because if you put this side out, you're gonna have a hard time getting it out next time, if there is a next time, because the way the race is. This is designed to where the bearing will go out that way and leave the race in the axle. So it goes on just like this. And that's gonna be where we're gonna have to press it on to get that part down. That seal, you don't want to pinch it or mess it up. I'm going to put a big socket in here to push on. Just gonna push on. It should go on fairly smooth as you're pressing, but as you can see, I'm going to get to a point to where those bolts are going to be in the way. That's when I'm going to put the next part on, and then I can push both of them, because I've got to go past the point to where those bolts are. But let's go ahead and put this next component on. This ring doesn't have a way that it goes on, it just goes on. And that's going to be pushed on along with the bearing. Now we should have enough room to compress everything on. It's going to compress down to this line right here. If you can look at this line right here, that's where the bearing has to rest, against that seam. This seals your axle so that the gear oil stays inside, differential oil stays inside. There's a small spring on there. If you look at that spring in the back, you don't want to have that spring come off, because that's what keeps that tight. Once it's down all the way, it's not going to move anymore. Then you can release the pressure on your bottle jack and carefully take the axle out. And so I have my mount that holds it against the end of the axle yoke, the seal, the bearing, and then the retainer. Make sure that you don't mix up right and left side of the axle. But let's go ahead and do the next axle and put the bearing and race and seal on. And that's all the way on. That's my second axle. One time on the blue Jeep, I thought I put the race on backwards. After I put it in, I realized I didn't. Secondly, another time, I pinched the seal on the way in. Had to take it all the way off. Here's a note. The seal is all the way to the outside. The bearing is pressed on and you have to cut it off. If you fail to put the seal on properly, you're gonna have a wasted bearing and bearing retainer. Now those things at $50 to $90 a pop, you don't want to make a mistake on one. Now I'm gonna grease everything up when I put it in the axle, especially the seal. But this is the driver's side. While I've got all this off, I'm gonna go ahead and change the parking brakes, because it's probably been a while and they look pretty worn. Now parking brakes are unique because they're kind of like old school drum brakes. Lots of springs. On one side there's usually going to be a yellow spring with a yellow line that tells you the alignment. This is the adjuster that expands or compresses to make your parking brake tighter or looser. So you got to watch that line that's on there. If there's not a line on there, go ahead and paint one with a yellow or white paint pen so that you know. Pay attention to how the springs go on. That these springs, there's one on each side. This is the mechanism that activates it, and then these little clips hold everything on. What you want to do is take your phone and take a picture of everything for reference. Powerstop new brake shoes. These are going to be for right in here. After you've taken your pictures of how the springs go and how the adjuster goes and how this fits in here, This part comes loose when you take off the assembly. You'll notice that. So watch, it's gonna fit back in, and you usually see a mark in the back. Get your adjuster and adjust it down. So stick your pliers in the spring, pull the spring down. That'll give you the grip that you need, and work that spring out. Careful, because you don't want to break this spring. Otherwise, you're gonna have to replace it. With that spring loose, you can go ahead and you can lift the brake assembly away from the adjuster, just like that. Carefully take the adjuster out. Remember which way it goes. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna spin this on up. It's usually pretty dirty, but you can see how clean that bolt is on the other side. You're gonna work them, just kind of work it slowly off. You should be able to carefully work that spring out of the hole. And that's why you take pictures. Because sometimes when you're taking the springs off, your brakes just pop off. I'm just hooking them through that hole. They're gonna come and they're gonna rest against this part. This part is gonna go right in here just like this. It's gonna hold your brakes in there. So yellow spring, that adjuster needs to be adjusted out. Blue springs, this is all in here. These end caps right here fit right against there. There are resting points that the brakes themselves will rest upon. Your axle has to be cleaned and ready. Your holes have to line up to get the mounting bracket on that holds the entire assembly in the axle. And then we're gonna have to adjust these out so that the shoes themselves are fitting against the drum. I'm still waiting on my ABS sensor to be delivered, but that's okay, that can go in afterwards. But I'm gonna go ahead and lube this up really good. It's just gonna put some grease in there, and I'm using marine grade grease. Put some around all my components here. Your axle splines are gonna have to line up with the splines inside the differential. So as it goes in, you're gonna have to make sure it lines up right. Then you're gonna have to kind of push down until you feel it find the inside of the differential. Line it up, give it a little twist, and it should pretty much just push in. Once you got your axle in and your mounting plate, you can take your locking nuts and put them onto the back of the plate where the bolts stuck through the back. So you'll see them just like this. Caddy corner from the other side so that it pulls everything evenly. It's important to get these tight because this mounting bracket and those 4 bolts are what holds your axle in. So that's the parking brake assembly. I still have to put the drum on, but I'm still waiting for my new ABS sensors. I'm going to put the drum on nice and snug as it goes across the top of these brakes, and then I'll adjust this. Your parking brake in a JK also has an adjustment underneath the brake lever, but most people adjust this out here. You want your parking brake to work so that when you jump out of your Jeep to catch a snake, you can pull the brake and the Jeep will stop because your passenger will appreciate that. Amazon's here, bringing me my ABS sensors. I didn't know if you were going to read that or not. All right, well, thank you very much.
He got his pipe.
And everything tuned, including a new little teeny bolt to put on. Make sure the back of your ABS mount is clean. So most ABS sensors come with a little bit of grease, and so the grease is going to go on this portion right here. So it's just keeping corrosion away from that connection there. You're going to carefully stick it in there. My original ABS came with a small 8mm bolt. That seems a lot easier than this Allen head. So I'm going to put my original bolt back in. Don't over tighten that. It's a teeny little bolt. My ABS sensor's plugged in right down there. And the next thing I'm going to do is put my drums on. And your drums from Powerstop are labeled. See, this is rear, driver side. Rear, driver side. So it's going to tell you where it goes. And that feels nice and snug against that emergency brake. So we're gonna leave that way for right now. I'm kind of getting hungry. I've been at this between work and this for well over 12 hours today, and I'm gonna eat some dinner, so we'll see you tomorrow. Well, why do we have to stop sometimes in the afternoon in Florida? This is why. Tuesday, Wednesday. What is today? Wednesday?
Wednesday.
It's Wednesday. I don't even know what day it is. Well, it's the third day. The rain is gone, and let's pick up where we left off. Put that cover on there. We're gonna go ahead and put the brakes on. Now, to get the brakes on, the first thing you're gonna have to do, for me, I'm gonna take the caliper holder off, and then I just kind of set the brake up here. I'm gonna take out my old retainers, these clips, taking out the old clips. So the next thing I do, in this particular year, you can still just push the caliper back. A lot of the newer calipers, you have to have a specialized caliper compressor that's going to actually rotate the caliper when it pushes back. Old school ways, you can use this old school standard C-clip, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put it into the caliper, and then it's pushing the caliper inwards. You get 4 clips. They go inside these little spots right here, and this is how on this year they go. This part that's kind of shaped like a roof is going to go toward the rotor, and since it's upside down, it's going to go this way. That means when it sits on there, it's going to sit like that. So the part that looks like a roof goes toward the rotor. Now the way that I like to put these in is I put this side on first, and then I give it a push until it clicks in. Again, keep in mind these things are sharp, so be careful. Now I kind of push this back. Now you get grease with your brakes. The grease goes on here. This is an important area to grease that's back in here. If you're taking that off, it's a little difficult for me to do that right now because I didn't take it off. So I can either pull this out of here and put some grease in, and I can try to squirt a little bit of grease down in there like this. The boot back on. The other place that you want to put some grease is on these clips that we just put in. This just helps everything slide into place. So if you're in doubt to where it goes, look what they put on the back of the grease thing. It tells you where to put the grease on the sliders for the caliper, on the connecting points right there. So anything that's kind of moving, that's where you want to put it. Next up is the shoes. Now the shoes, of course, don't want this side touching the rotors. This is the outside. This is the shoe that rides. This part right here is what they call a whistler or squealer. And basically, when your brakes get down to the point to where they're almost wore out, it starts to hit this piece of metal, and that's where you get that squealy noise. That's telling you it's really time to change your brakes. We'll start with the one that's got the squealer on it going toward the back. To put these on, you tuck them into those clips. Now this is going to be one of those things that probably is going to be a little bit of a fight for you. So I usually start by putting the bottom part on. Put the bottom part on. Then I lightly lift up that roof portion, and that'll allow me to slide the brake into the gap. And don't push it all the way in. Or you'll push it right out the other side. So that side's in. Now for the other one. Rounded toward the rounded portion of the caliper. Start with the lower part. And that leaves me just enough room to slide it onto my rotor. And don't leave these old tabs laying around. This would be worse than a Lego. It is sharp metal. So make sure those go in the proper place to be disposed of. I'm going to bring it around. It rests right in here. Everything's ready to go. Once it's in, take one of your bolts, line it up. Once I'm happy with where they're at, I'm going to proceed with my 18mm, and I'm going to snug them up. Torque specs for that bolt are listed right below. For most people, you're going to go ahead and you're going to put your wheel back on. Now, you need to look at the manufacturer's recommendation for your brakes, whether they're ceramic or not. Some of the brakes are ceramic, and some of the brakes require something called burnishing. This is some Powerstop Extreme truck brakes. The holes that are in here and these grooves are to get the mud and debris out when you're off-roading. But sometimes with the new shoes and the new rotors, these little holes will make a popping noise and it'll sound like Wheel of Fortune. That does eventually go away, but it may take a month or so before it stops sounding like Wheel of Fortune. If you get it, you'll know what I'm talking about. Burnishing brakes usually means, for me, getting up to about 25-30 miles an hour and applying the brakes aggressively but not locking them up. Getting up to 30 miles an hour and applying the brakes aggressively. I do that anywhere from 8 to 12 times, and what that does is it seats everything. It burnishes the brakes and will make them last a whole lot longer. Chocolate milk is coming out of my differential, as you saw earlier in the video. So the last thing I have to do to this red Jeep is change the differential fluid. Now, on the stock Dana 44, I see a lot of people taking the differential cover off to drain it out the bottom. What a lot of people may not know is that over here in the corner, there's a drain plug. Something that you can do to help things. You can take it out for a quick drive and heat it up a little bit and the oil will flow out a little bit better, but I want to get that chocolate milk, which is oil and water, on out. I'm going to put in some 80W90 into the differential. To get it out of here and into there, we stopped at Advanced Auto Parts and picked up this pump. It's a fluid lubricant pump, so it goes down inside here, you push it, and it's going to fill it right into there. There's a magnet on the end of the plug. You always want to check that to make sure that there's no metal chunks or anything, because that usually picks it up. It plugs in right into the differential. Gonna pull this over here, and then we're gonna pump. And as we pump, you see that fluid going through there? And how much do you put in? You put it in until it starts to flow out the hole. Once it flows out the hole, then it's full. Now you see that it's dripping out. That means it's full. Hey, thanks for watching. This is Matt, and this has been a how-to video. We have changed the axle seals, we changed the bearings, the bearing retainers, we changed the brakes, the rotors, the pads, and because I got water into my differential somehow, we changed the differential fluid. A lot of these things you can do yourself. There's links below. Some of it did require specialty tools, like a press is a really big one, a grinder to get the old bearing off. Those are big ones. But I can tell you that buying specialty tools pays for themselves with a few jobs that you do on your own. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. We'll see you on the next trail. Tires. Am I in the middle yet?
Almost. Yeah, you're starting to go over the middle.
Your passengers look terrified. Well, you got to balance.
I'm balanced. Ha ha ha.
There's Judge, you got a prize for that.
Let's go divine intervention. I'm gonna accelerate a little bit because I don't know if it's gonna try to catch my back end or not.
The back end's gonna bounce really hard when you do.